Welcome back to another episode of the Jessica Ella podcast. I am your host, Jessica Ella. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about how I healed the father wound. And obviously there are going to be different scales of the father wound because there are so many different wounds that we can have in relation to the masculine and in relation to our father. I will be coming at it from my perspective and my experience because that is all I know, but take from it what you will. I will try and include some other examples of clients that I've worked with as well so that you can get a bit of an idea of the different ways that the father wound can manifest. The deepest scar that the father wound left on me would have to be this belief that men are superior and that men only want you for what you can give to them. And I think I experienced this so many times throughout my life. I had this really deeply ingrained wound and belief that men only wanted women because they wanted something from them, that we weren't, of any use, or we weren't a human almost in our own right. Like I didn't feel like I existed as a person. It felt like I was there to meet his needs. And I never had this feeling of like someone actually seeing me and seeing me as a human being who has needs and who has wants and desires and who deserves those things. And that biggest scar from him was this only ever knowing how to exist in context to somebody else and not as like an individual, and not believing that I could be loved just because I'm me, not believing that I could be loved without somebody wanting something from me. And it's something that I've only recently healed with my current partner, Gav, because he's proven to me that he doesn't want anything from me. He just loves me as I am and wants to be with me, not because he's getting something from me or not because he requires something from me. The father wound shaped the way that I saw men, love, and myself, in that I saw men as the only form of validation that mattered. It was like, if a man doesn't desire me, I don't exist. If a man doesn't desire me, there's no point in living, essentially. It was my only, and so what it meant was that I learned from this father wound that, love isn't safe. Love is toxic. Love, it looks like abuse and it feels like abuse, and abuse feels like love. And it caused me to again believe that I was less than. I didn't exist as an individual. It just taught me that, a man's needs come before anything else, and that a man's needs are the most important thing. And it unconsciously makes you feel that as a woman, you are less. And as a woman, you don't deserve to ask for anything. You don't deserve to want anything. And so it really affected my self-worth. It affected my confidence. It affected what I thought love was. And for so many years, I didn't even really register that the love that I was getting and the love that I was receiving was unhealthy, and that it was toxic, and that it didn't feel good, and that actually, in fact, wasn't love at all, because I just didn't have a understanding of what love was in a healthy platonic way. Love to me was sexual. That was it. That was all it was. It was sexual, it was sexual abuse. And so it really shaped the way that I saw love, but also men, because I believed that I needed them to validate my existence. I needed them to want me and desire me because that was love, but I also feared them greatly. And this father wound rippled into really a wound overall with the masculine. There was no men that I trusted. There was no men that I would feel safe around, and I would have really negative thoughts about all men as a general category. And so it really limited me in relationships, because I believed that men were evil and that men were bad and that men were toxic and abusive. And so because I believed that, I settled for the ones who were, and I unconsciously was seeking out the ones who were, because that's what I believed, that's what love was, that's what men were. And so it was causing this really toxic pattern where I would constantly be proving over and over the beliefs that I had, those subconscious beliefs. And so it rippled into every area of life. I think one of the hardest things about the father wound is that you realize at some point that a father is supposed to protect you. A father is, the masculine is supposed to protect the feminine. The father is supposed to protect his child. And the wound runs very deep when the person who is supposed to love you unconditionally and protect you is the person who's abusing you. It's very confusing as a child as well, but when the person who is supposed to protect you from all of the bad is the one that's doing the bad, you start to believe very deep to your core that you're not lovable and that you don't deserve to be protected. And that's one of the deepest wounds, because when you don't believe that you deserve to be protected, you don't protect or look after yourself. And you just see yourself as nothing. And that word was so deeply ingrained in me. I'm nothing. Like, I'm nothing to him. I'm nothing to anybody. I'm just nothing. I don't exist. I'm invisible. I think as women as well, when we realize from a young age that nobody is there to protect us and that nobody will protect us, it's not necessarily true. There are people that would have protected us, and there are men that will protect you later on in life if you do that healing work. And I've got that evidence now. But to believe that I wasn't protected and that I wouldn't be protected made me feel incredibly unsafe. And so I spent a lot of those years, of those teen years and of those early 20s, just believing that men weren't safe and that I wasn't safe and that therefore nowhere was safe. And having that father wound where he is the biggest form of, he's the biggest threat. He was the biggest threat in my life and the biggest source of betrayal. You really can't trust anybody. That foundation of trust that is normally built in childhood with your parents, where you learn to trust them and they trust you and you build this foundation, that foundation isn't built. And so you go around the rest of your life believing that everybody is going to hurt you in the same way that he did, and everybody is going to betray you in the same way that he did, and that love is always going to feel like abuse. And it is a very deep wound because you don't know any different. Like you don't have any point of reference for something different. It's not like and again, this is when it's the father, like it's not the same as if you have a beautiful father, but it's an uncle that's maybe abusing you, or a grandfather. Like, it is different when it is your father that is abusing you, whether it's sexually, physically, emotionally. It is different because it is that person who is setting you up with that base trust and love to then take out into the world. And so when you don't have it there, you don't have a reference for it. And so all of a sudden you have to create something. And this is what I had to do. I had to create evidence that it does exist in some man somewhere. And that for me was Gav, and a little bit with my stepdad too. But you actually have to create and look for and find evidence that men can protect you and that they can be safe and that they can love you and not want anything from you. And you have to really work on building that up when you weren't just given it in the way that you should have been given it from childhood. It should just be something that comes naturally, that you get in childhood because of a father just being a father, being naturally protective and loving and keeping you safe. And so this father wound for me often, I find that it shows up in women around safety. And the mother wound is different. The mother wound often causes a lot of issues with women in their relationships with other women in their life, and it can really affect their sense of warmth and nurturing. But the father wound is all around safety. And so a lot of these women with father wounds, they feel unsafe in relationships. They feel unsafe around men. They feel unsafe in their bodies, in their lives, with their emotions. And their father wound is causing this feeling of this lack of safety because they didn't have that foundation of safety. There were times when I thought that I would always be this way. There were times even after I had cut my dad out of my life that I found myself still missing him, wanting to see him, to run to him. There was times that I found myself in relationships or in my marriage where I was repeating the same cycles, and it felt like I was reliving the same trauma that I had lived with my dad. It felt like I was in the same pattern and in the same cycle. And there were times where I just thought, this is just what it's like. It's probably going to be like this forever. This is just what it's like to be with a man. This is just what it's like to, if you want to be in a relationship with a man, this is just what you have to put up with. This is just how it is. And it's obviously so far from the truth. But one thing that I find interesting is that even when it came to being with a different type of man like Gav, every cell in my body was like, this is wrong. He's just a friend. He's just a friend. Like, it's probably not a romantic connection. Like, it just feels like we're more friends. It just feels like quite easy and fun and kind of carefree, but that's not really what love feels like. And I had to really think about what love was and what love should feel like, and notice those patterns in myself. And I find a lot of women think that it's never going to get better for them. And then they start dating, and then they meet this really nice guy and they're like, oh, he's not my type. And I always say to them, I have some of my most popular reels on social media is this quote exactly, which is that sometimes the biggest green flag of all is when you find yourself saying, he's not my type. Because to be honest, if you have a father wound, your type is probably an asshole. Your type is probably toxic. Your type is probably abusive. And so it's a great thing if he's not your type, because your type is not good. And so I had to start looking at all this advice that I could give to other people and these things that I'd learned. I had to start applying it to myself. And I'll tell you, it's much harder when you have to apply it to yourself. But I definitely thought there were times where I wasn't ever going to actually heal this father wound, and that I would still always be looking for my father's love in another man. This is this thing like repetition compulsion, is that we as human beings will look for somebody who is similar to the person who hurt us in order to try and repair the original wound with somebody who feels familiar. So I was finding people that felt the same and made me feel the same way that my dad made me feel. But then I would be trying to get them to love me in the way that I was always trying to get my dad to love me as a child. And the flaw with this plan is that it doesn't really work, because the people that we are unconsciously choosing are very similar to the people who hurt us, to our fathers. And so they end up doing the same things, and they end up making us feel even more unloved and adding some burden to that wound, to that original wound. And so sometimes we're resistant to somebody who could actually heal the wound because it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like you're actually healing the wound because they feel so different. It's like, yeah, but he's so different. It doesn't feel like I've actually healed the father wound. And there were so many times that I felt like I'm not going to be able to heal it, because I'm just not going to be able to choose somebody who's good for me, because I'll get the ick and I'll be like, ugh, and repulsed, or I'll make, he's just a friend, and I'll kind of like push them away. And I just didn't think that I would even be able to be attracted to a nice guy. And it actually did take a lot of work to get past, before I even met Gav, to get past some of those blocks that I had around what I thought love should look and feel like, because my reference for it was very poor. The emotions that were the hardest to face when it came to healing the father wound was actually quite layered. And for me, it was really a combination of grief, fear, and just this anger and this rage. And the anger and the rage really came later on. But when I first cut my dad out of my life, which was a really scary time, because I also feared, once he knew that I was cutting him out, I feared what he would do. So there was this big pull between all of these different emotions. And by the time that I'd cut him out and that I realized that I needed to heal this father wound, had done a lot of healing work. So I was quite aware of what I was feeling and where it could be coming from. And I was very aware at that point that I had been diagnosed with Stockholm syndrome. And so I knew that when I was grieving him, that was this part of me that was like hyper attached to him, that was obsessed with him, that couldn't let him go. I could really identify that that's what was happening. So I was able to sort of step outside of being in it to be able to evaluate it, which is kind of sounds very clinical or like very logical, but I was feeling all of the emotions, but I would notice that the flip that I was having between these emotions was so extreme that there was something that needed to be worked on there. And for me, healing DID or dissociative identity disorder also really helped me to heal the father wound, because he was the person who was abusing me. So he was the person who I had to create those personalities to survive. So I had to work with both of those personalities, and one of those personalities loved him excessively, and therefore when I cut him out and started to heal this wound, had to grieve him. And so I spent months crying every single day, missing him, grieving him. It felt like he had died, and wishing that I could see him, wishing that I could just like drive to his house, or it felt like I wanted to run to him. Like it was like every cell in my body just wanted to run to him, and I grieved him, and I felt heartbroken, like the worst heartbreak I've ever felt. But then in my other personality and on my other side, I felt completely terrified of him. And I was so terrified that he was going to come for me. I was so terrified that he was going to kill me, that he was going to harm me or harm my children. And so there was this fear. And then somewhere between the fear shifting, and the fear was like always there a little bit, but a lot of that fear shifting and then that grief moving on. Once I stopped grieving him, and once I stopped idolizing him and feeling sorry for myself and feeling sorry for him too. I felt very sorry for him when I cut him out of my life, and because my brother and sister also cut him out at the same time, so he lost everybody at once. And obviously he very much deserves that for what he did, but I was very empathetic towards him, and I felt sorry, and I was always thinking about like what he might be experiencing and what he might be feeling and how he might be coping with this situation. And once I moved out of that and I felt the love sort of fading for him and the trauma bond wearing off, I moved into anger, and like red hot anger, rage, like a lot of anger, a lot of suppressed anger. And it was really being driven by my inner teenager who had, when I was a teenager, I was quite angry about everything he'd done to me as a child. And this was the time where he really put his foot down, and where him and my grandfather, his father, tortured me and told me that they would kill me if I told anybody. And so the fear really took over, but the anger was still there. And all the anger that I felt in those teenage years for not being able to speak up and not being able to tell people what he'd done and to express how I was feeling and to pretend that everything was okay. Like I had friends that were going through stuff in school, and they were telling me, and they were being very dramatic about these teenage things that were happening. And I just always had to pretend that everything was okay, when really I was suffering more than any of them. And holding in all of that pain and all of the things that he'd done, because I felt like I couldn't say anything because I would die. Once I did say everything and I told the world and I started speaking up on social media and I cut him out of my life, all of that anger that I wasn't allowed to feel came back up to the surface, and it was so intense. Like I was just angry every day. I just wanted to drive to his house. I thought about different things that I could do to like hurt him or to like retaliate. And I started the court process of trying to, go to court and get some justice. And I really just felt this anger, and I moved through that anger by really very much somatically. I would go into memories that I had of him, and I would yell at him and I'd scream at him and I'd punch him and kick him. And I would imagine that I was, taking my power back and getting all that anger out. And then I'd drive to the beach and I'd dive under the water and I would scream underwater, like scream as loud as I could. And I would just let all this anger out. And I was doing that every day for months to just move through all of this anger that was coming up. And out the other side of the fear, and the fear popped up all in between everything. The fear continued to pop up until not that long ago, probably 6 months ago. The fear was always sort of there, but once that love shifted and then once that anger shifted, I felt nothing. And this is what people don't realize. They get stuck in the grief. And they just grieve and they grieve and they grieve. And some of them even go, get their father back into their life and they re-engage in the relationship because the feeling of grief is too heavy. Or they move into the anger and they act on the anger and they blow up their life by, doing something stupid or by using that anger to, if I was to use my anger to spread the message that I'm sending right now to the world, it would come out in a very different way. I would be one of those people that is on social media saying, predators are this and predators are that, and they should go into jail. And my content would be coming from anger. I was very intentional in making sure that I moved through the grief. I moved through the anger, and I felt very platonic about the situation before I was ready to do something with it. And this is where, like I said, people get stuck in the grief and they go back to the person who hurt them. And this pattern continues, they're doing that with their dad, but they're also doing that with their toxic husband or partner. And they can't deal with this feeling of missing them and longing for them and this grief. So they go back, or they feel the anger and then they don't know what to do with the anger. So they push it back down. And then it turns back into grief, or they push the anger down and they get sick, or, there's so many different things that happen when we push these emotions down. But out the other side of actually feeling them, and like I said, it did take months, but out the other side of feeling them, I actually came out the other side and feel, as I said, quite platonic. I would say that I forgive my dad. I'd say that I accept my dad. I'd say that I am fully at peace with everything that happened. I don't wish ill of him. I don't really even think about him that often unless I'm recording or the subject is about him. Day to day, he doesn't have any effect on my life. And there are no effects from everything that he did on my life anymore. But the way that I did that was that I literally created a new version of myself. I healed every memory where he was abusive, and I took back my power, and I spoke up, and I, told myself that I was beautiful and loved and worthy. And I did that over and over and over until it felt like, and it feels like now, none of those things actually happened. It feels like I've always been worthy and powerful, and it feels like he doesn't have any effect on my life. And so this is the most powerful place that you can get to, because for as long as they have an effect on your life, or for as long as you're still dealing with all of the trauma from what happened with them, they still are affecting you. They're still present, even if they're not physically present. And so this is why processing all of those memories is so important, because he actually doesn't have a hold on anything anymore. And I actually get to be a person. I actually get to be an individual. I actually get to be whoever I want to be and do whatever I want to do, because I'm not under that control anymore. And people think, oh, I'm not under that control. I've cut my dad out too. But they're still living in their subconscious and in their identity and in the way that they show up, very much connected to that. And this is why I see a lot of people who've been through abuse by their parents, and they start up these social media pages and they say, they're teaching about toxic parents and they're teaching about abuse over and over and over and over. And they're angry, and they're still really angry at their parents, and they're still really hurting that they didn't get the childhood that they wanted. And they're talking about how unfair it is that they've been abused and that they didn't get that childhood. And this is how you know that somebody's not healed and that they're not the right person to be giving you advice, because that person still has a hold over you. If you're doing that sort of work and if you're sending out that sort of message, they still have control over your subconscious and over, how far you can go in life. There's no blocks anymore from my dad. There's no limits in what I can achieve and what I can do and what I can say. And it did obviously take a long time to get to this point, but you can heal that father wound, but it does involve you changing who you are and you creating who you want to be, not who you had to be for him to love you. And that's really what it comes down to. Who did you have to be for him to love you? For me, I had to be small and quiet and silent and invisible, and I had to be self-sacrificing. And that was who I had to be for him to love me. How can I then, even if I cut him out, if I'm still that version of myself, but he's not in my life, he still wins. He still has a hold over me. If I'm still small and self-sacrificing and playing out all the patterns that he created in me. And so for me, healing the father wound was very much about healing all of the wounds, not just the father wound, but all of the small wounds that he created in my identity, to rebuild myself to become the woman that I want to be, not the woman that he thinks I should be. Because even in the smallest things that I used to do in my business decisions, in past businesses, I would always be doing everything thinking, is this going to make him proud? Is he going to love me? Is he going to think this is good? And I realized that always wanting to make him proud and wanting him to think that what I was doing was good was just still me trying to prove my worth to him. Still me trying to get him to go, you've done an amazing job, and therefore I would feel loved by him. And so I stopped trying to prove anything to him. And I never looked back. I think the moment that I stopped trying to earn this love from him, that was never coming. And don't get me wrong, he did love me in moments. I mean, he loved me in abusive moments, but he also did love me in other moments too. But I think that the moment that I realized that he was never actually going to love me in the way that he should love me, in the way that a father should love a daughter, was really when I remembered everything that had happened and had that context of my father actually is abusive, and the way that he loves me and the way that I love him is wrong and unnatural, and I'm never going to heal and be the best version of me whilst I'm still connected to him. And so the pivotal moment for me was choosing to cut him out of my life and sending that message and cutting that tie. I remember that day very vividly, and it felt like a line in the sand. And although from there things got very bad for a good 6 months plus, it was still a pivotal moment, because in telling him, I don't want you in my life, and, I remember everything that you did to me and it's not okay, I took my power back just in that moment by drawing that line in the sand. And so many women avoid that moment. They're like, one of the most common questions that I get asked is, even if my dad's a bad dad, can I still keep him in my life? Can I still have him in my life and just, accept that he is the way that he is? And I normally say to them, well, can you? Like, can you do that? Can you have him in your life and just fully accept him the way that he is? Or every time you see him, do you get triggered? Every time you see him, do you feel worse about yourself? Every time you do something, do you still wonder whether he's proud of you? That's going to give you a pretty clear indication as to whether you can. Can you keep him in your life and still heal? Can you keep him in your life and still become the best version of you? Again, it depends on the level of abuse. It depends what he did. It also depends who he is now, because sometimes my stepdad is the perfect example of who my stepdad was when I was a child and who my stepdad is now are quite different men. And my stepdad accepted that he wasn't a good stepdad. He wasn't a good person to be around. And I don't talk about him a lot because I do have a good relationship with him now. So I don't like to say anything bad about him, but he had really, really bad anger issues, and he didn't really want kids around. So there was a lot of like, go away, be quiet, go away, really feeling invisible. And then on the flip side of that, like a lot of aggression and anger and rage from him. One of the things that we have to think about is, have they actually changed? Have they actually done the work to change? Have they accepted that who they were wasn't good and that their behaviors weren't good, and have they taken accountability? And I think I realized with my dad that he was never going to accept. He was never going to take accountability. He was never going to admit to it. And so I often reflect this back to him, and I'm like, if somebody has changed. And, and again, it depends on what they've done. So like I said, my dad was very abusive. My stepdad, it wasn't as bad. It wasn't sexual. It was verbal abuse. It was anger levels and things like that. But he has changed. And so, you can keep that person in your life because they're not the same person that they were back then. But I think that if people aren't changing and growing, and you're still going to be triggered by their actions because all those childhood wounds are still there. And as an adult, when they say something or do something, it's going to remind you of all of those things that they said or did when you were younger, when you were a child. And so if they haven't done any level of self-growth, it's really difficult to keep them in your life. And we do that because we don't want discomfort. We don't want to lose, our siblings or other members of the family. We don't want to, risk losing everybody. But it can also be really difficult to actually heal whilst that person is still in your life. For me, as I mentioned, I think forgiveness has come, and I do have this understanding of how he could have done what he did and what happened to him as a child. And my father was very abused himself as a child. He was sexually abused, physically abused. He was treated very poorly as a child. And so I can understand how those patterns played out. And I know that he did have a choice, but I also do forgive him for the way that he was and for the things that he did. And I think that forgiveness comes once you've worked on, like, for so many people, it could sound insane that I forgive my father after knowing everything that he's done. But I think that forgiveness does come once all of those emotions are out of the way. And once all of those memories have been processed, because it feels so much easier to forgive somebody when everything that they did no longer affects your life. If it still affects your life, you're still a victim to it. And if you're still a victim to it, you're going to be angry at them and you're going to be hurting and you're going to be frustrated. So I think that forgiveness, it wasn't something that I sort of set out to do, and it wasn't like a technique that I did. It was just something that naturally happened. This forgiveness and acceptance came after I had created a new identity, healed the trauma, and after everything that he did no longer had any effect on my life anymore. The belief that I had to kill, delete, remove from myself in order to be able to heal this father wound, and in order to be able to cut him out and to really deeply start that healing process, was the belief that I needed him, the belief that I couldn't live without him, the belief that I would die without him, the belief that life wasn't worth living without him. I was that connected to him, that intertwined with him, that life, when I cut him out, felt like it just wasn't worth living. It felt like, and there was a number of things coming into play with that, be it grief as well as fear, because it was like, if he's not in my life, he's going to come for me. And if he's going to come for me, I'm going to die. So I may as well just, end it now so that I don't have to wait for him to come for me. But I think that I really identify now with, we can love our parents, and I deeply love my mum and I love my stepdad, but I don't have a belief that I can't live without them, and that I would die if I would rather die if they died. I know that it would be awful and I would grieve them, but that level of like connection and intensity was really holding me like hostage. It was like I existed just for him. Like, it's like I was one with him. Like, I wasn't my own person. And I think like once I removed those beliefs, I started to become like Jess. I started to become Jessica Ella. I started to become me. I started to become a person. And before that, it was very much like, even when I was married with kids and lived separately to him, it was still like I was connected to him. It was still like I needed him for survival. I needed him. And the biggest fucking irony is that I actually never needed him for survival, because he never helped me to survive. He never protected me. Like, I survived him on my own by coping, by splitting into multiple personalities, and by finding ways to protect myself from him. I survived him. I actually didn't need him to survive at all, but that's the way that our brain tricks us, because if I had have believed that I didn't need him then, I probably would have spoken up or left or ran away or done something. And if I had have done that, I felt like I would have died. So I actually had to believe, for protection, that I needed him for survival when really I actually didn't. And that was one of the most empowering things to realize is I never needed him to survive. I actually needed to survive him. Healing the father wound as a mother helped me to understand what I didn't get from him that I really needed, so that I could make sure that my boys have those needs met, so that I could make sure that my boys feel safe and secure and loved. But healing the father wound freed me as a person, which freed me as a mother, because it showed me that I was important. It showed me that I was my own person and that I mattered. And then I started showing up as that sort of person and not being tied to him and not being tied to all of the beliefs that I believed that I had to be for him meant that I could become the best version of myself for them. And they get to see that best version of me, and they get to experience a mum who feels powerful and strong and important, and I show up in that way and I teach them how to be like that. I don't teach them how to be small. And I think if anything, my dad and a little bit my mum, if I'm being honest, taught me what I don't want to be like as a parent. And healing that father wound showed me all of the ways in which he hurt me, the big ways and the small ways, which meant that I know exactly what not to do. And I know that, one of my biggest things was always that I never felt like I was enough. I felt like no matter what I did, it just wasn't good enough. You get good scores, good grades in school, and you're too smart, or you're a nerd, or you're failing and you're dumb, or no matter what you do, it's not enough. And so there was these conditions to love. And I think everyone experiences this to a degree with their fathers and their father wound, and with their mothers too, where it's there's these unsaid, unspoken conditions to love. And it's you have to be a good girl in order to be loved. You have to be quiet. You have to be nice. You have to be polite. You have to be smart, but not too smart. You have to be strong and brave, but not too strong and brave. You've also got to be a little bit quiet and a little bit, and there is these criteria, and we don't relate it directly back to love, but we do unconsciously, because we feel that our mum or our dad is mad at us when we're too loud. So we think, I can't be too loud or they won't love me. And because of this, and because of healing the father wound and realizing everything that I was trying to be for him, I started this little thing with my boys where at night I ask them, do you know why I love you? And they take guesses, and they're like, because I'm good at basketball, or because I'm this and I'm that. And I always finish by saying to them, I love you just because you're you. I love you just because you exist. You don't have to do anything to be loved. And they laugh. And now it's to the point where I say to them, do you know why I love you? And they say, because I'm me. And they know what I'm about to say, but I want them to know that they're loved without any conditions. And they sometimes test me on it. My son the other day, my 7-year-old, came home and said, Mum, I have a boyfriend. And I was like, cool, who's your boyfriend? And he laughed and he's like, what do you mean cool? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, I said I have a boyfriend. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, that would mean that I'm gay. And I'm like, and? And he was like, but you wouldn't care if I was gay? And I was like, no, I would think that's great if that's what you were. I love you no matter what. And he thought about it for a while, and then he comes back and he's like, Mum, would you love me even if I went to jail? And I was like, I don't want you to go to jail, but I would still love you if you went to jail. I love you no matter what. And then he came back and he had 5 different very concerning scenarios, but he just kept coming back and saying, would you love me if this? And would you love me if I did that? And I just kept saying, Banjo, there is nothing you can do that would make me stop loving you. I love you no matter what. And I think that the way that I responded to that, and the way that I think, and the way that I feel towards them, and the way that I parent them really does come back to me being so healed from my own childhood, and knowing what didn't feel good, and what beliefs I created from those different experiences to know what they need. The most liberating thing that I discovered through healing the father wound is that we as women deserve to exist in our own right. We deserve to exist as individuals, not just as somebody's wife, as somebody's girlfriend, as somebody's lover, as somebody's whatever, as somebody's daughter even. We actually deserve to exist as an individual person. And I think that this is often granted to men and boys more so than it is women, because we become the mothers, the carers, the caretakers. And so what I learned from healing this father wound and reclaiming my power, and I think as well with the father wound, I really reclaimed my voice and started to speak. And I think that if I hadn't have healed that, there would have always been this part of me that wanted to speak. And maybe the part of me that wants to speak and is so passionate about public speaking and the podcast and things like that is because I was silenced for so long. So maybe I can thank him for that. But I think that, you know, the biggest healing is around you do, once you cut these ties, realize that you are your own individual. And even in a relationship, this affects me because, you know, in past relationships, I would want to do what they wanted to do and go where they wanted to go and hang out with their friends. And I would kind of let all of my own individual needs and desires and, you know, what I wanted to do kind of fall by the wayside. And so it's also given me this, it's helped in relationships, it's helped in friendships, it's helped me to become my own person with my own wants and needs and desires that I can follow. So when Gav says to me on the weekend, do you want to come to my friend's birthday party? I can think about it and think, do I want to go with him to that because that's what I want to do? Or do I want to do something else? And I will say, actually, I want to go and go for a bushwalk. I actually want to go out hiking. I actually want to stay at home and meditate and do a face mask. And he's like, yep, cool. You do you, I do me. Like, you don't have to do what I want. And he reiterates that and he helps me with that. He has helped me in the past to do that because my go-to was always, what do you want to do? What do you want to eat? Where do you want to go? I'll do what you want to do. And I didn't have any needs or desires or wants of my own. And so healing that father wound and healing that wound where I only exist in context to him and becoming my own woman and not needing him. And this is where as well, like I think a lot of people get really hung up on what a father should and shouldn't be and what a mother should and shouldn't be. So we spend our lives thinking, well, she wasn't the mother I wanted or he wasn't the father that I wanted. And we sell ourselves short because we don't ever get to become an individual because we're always like grieving what we didn't get as a child. Oh, I didn't have a good childhood and then my father never emotionally supported me or my father never did this or that. Okay, that happened in childhood, but now you're an adult. And so we don't have that moment where we transition from child to adult and there's a line in the sand and we go, well, I'm a woman now, make my own choices, make my own decisions. We're still acting as if we're that child because we haven't healed that inner child. And so healing that inner child and doing that work actually allows us to become our own person. And I often suggest to people in healing sessions, and, you know, the women in the online trauma clinic can help with this sort of thing where we actually, even if we have a good relationship with our parents, we disconnect from them because even when we have good parents, not disconnect from them as in cut them out of your life, but disconnect from their opinions and their perspectives and all of their trauma and all of their stuff that they try to put on you and all of their, you know, everything. Like they get to become them and their you know, choices and reactions and everything is up to them and we get to become us. And yes, they created us, but there needs to be a time where we draw this line and we go, I'm me now and I don't need to live the way that my parents lived or the way that they want me to live. And that goes for both mum and dad. And I think that was probably the most powerful thing. And I have done that with both of my parents. So I'm not controlled by what they think I should do in any way, shape or form. How I should live my life, how I should parent, how I should run my business, how I should show up online, nothing. And I hear people that say, oh, you know, like my family will judge me if I post this on social media. And I'm like, you need to cut ties energetically with your family so that when they say something, you just smile and say, I just like doing it this way. This is just how I like to do it. And we're very disconnected in that way from their opinions and their perspectives, because if you spend your entire life trying to please your dad, trying to heal the father wound, trying to please your dad, trying to make him proud, you're wasting your life because you're not actually being you. You're not actually living the way that you want to live. So to the woman who feels like her entire identity is shaped by the father wound, who exists only in context to her boyfriend or her husband or to her family, who has no idea who she is and who is still hung up on, my dad did this, my dad did that. I can't heal from that. I end up in toxic relationships because I'm continuing this father wound pattern. The only way that you're going to get out of this, like truly, if I'm being bluntly honest, is by taking some responsibility for where you are right now. And yes, he was a part of what got you to where you are right now, but you actually get to choose now. You actually get to decide who you want to be from here forward. And if you keep blaming him, you're taking away your own power. I always used to say this to my clients. You can't blame and be powerful at the same time. Because when you're blaming someone else, you're giving them the power. He did this, he did that, it's his fault. If it's always his fault, how are you ever going to change it? If it's always his fault, how are you ever going to heal from it? He's not going to change, he's not going to apologize. The only way that you take your power back is by realizing that thing happened, but here's how I'm choosing to continue the patterns over and over and over. And we start to dive into those patterns and we start to look at the thoughts and we start to look at the things that we're blaming him for and the things that he did, and we heal them where they started. We heal all of those wounds so that all of a sudden you can say, my dad was a shitty dad, but I don't even think of him anymore. My dad was a shitty dad, but I healed my father wound and now I have this beautiful relationship with this loving man and I have full faith in the male species again. If I could speak to my younger self who is stuck surviving him, and I have spoken to her so many times in healings and in sessions and in processing memories, I would tell her that none of this is her fault, but that it is going to lead her to her purpose and that she is actually so much stronger than what she realizes. Like what she's coping with and surviving right now is more than any child should have to, but that it is actually going to make her stronger than what she could ever imagine, having to survive this and having to survive him. And I guess like where I am now, I wouldn't change anything because I love my life and I love where I am. But, if I could go back and tell her that this isn't real love, I would want to tell her that too. I want to tell her that this isn't how you're supposed to be loved. This isn't how love is supposed to feel or look. This isn't right. It isn't natural. And I don't want you to spend the rest of your life looking for this kind of love in other men and trying to heal this gaping hole. And I would want to take her out of there and I would want to show her what real love is. I'd probably want her to meet Gav and show her what it gets to be like now. And these are the sort of things that you can do in healing sessions. These are the sort of things that I've done. These are the sort of things that the therapists in the online clinic take you through, like meeting that inner child, healing and processing those memories with your father so that you can heal them and complete them so that you're not going to keep repeating that same pattern over and over and over. So we also cover this and we go into love wounds and, father wounds and mother wounds and all the traumas, but we go specifically into love and relationships and how to find those love wounds that formed and shaped who you are in the Triggered to Thriving series. So it's a really good place to start for you to start to uncover using the journal prompts and the healings. There's recorded healing activations, and it's a very, very powerful course that you can lead yourself through to start to uncover. And you can also do it alongside working with an online therapist, one of the therapists from the clinic who are all trained to be able to help you to heal your father wound. So if you know somebody who is struggling with a father wound who needs to hear this, I want you to send this episode to them. And if you haven't already, subscribe to whichever channel you're listening on. Leave us a comment if you love this episode. And thank you again for listening.